Welcome. We're so excited that you could join us. I'm Danny Kaplan. I'm the moderator for this panel. I'm a senior associate at Generator Ventures. We are the largest and longest established venture capital fund, hyper-focused at the intersection of senior care and technology. And we're partnered to some of the most impactful companies in this space, including some companies that are under this tent right now. Today, we're going to be talking about resilience as it relates to staffing and workforce management and long-term care. Just so we're all on the same page, resilience is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Now, yesterday, I flew here from San Diego. I flew from San Diego to Dallas and Dallas to Miami. The Dallas to Miami flight was supposed to leave at 3:15. We left at 5:15. Why? It was sunny in Dallas. It was sunny here. The plane was at the gate. I know because I showed up at 2 o'clock. I saw it there. The crew was on the plane. I know because I watched them board on time. We had to wait for a pilot to arrive. Not someone who was going to fly our plane, but he was deadheading to Miami because he had to fly out of there last night. We sat at the gate for almost 2 hours before he finally got there. That's workforce management. That's staffing. One person held up 200 people. Now, all of you have planes, and they're full of passengers. You're getting 10,000 more every single day. Where are your pilots? How do you find them? How do you retain them? How do you incentivize them? And we're here to learn from the workforce management experts in long-term care, not in aviation. We're going to be talking about how we got here, the ins and outs of the labor shortage, agencies, what the future holds, and if I'm feeling nice, maybe a little bit of Q&A. Now, to my panelists, if you can all provide just a short intro and talk a little bit about what your company does, we'll dive in from there. Chris?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm Chris Cunningham. I'm the Chief Science Officer for a company called Logi-Serve. We do competency-based assessments to help organizations identify talent and then also develop it post-hire. In the other half of my life, I'm also a professor and researcher of occupational health and well-being, and I specialize in the healthcare environment. So I'll try to give a couple of those perspectives today.
Hi, good morning, everyone. How are you? My name is Melissa Powell. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Genesis Healthcare. We operate in 22 states, long-term care, SNF, IL, and AL.
Hi, I'm Marina, Aslanyan, Smartlinx CEO. I've been with Smartlinx since 2014, and the company was founded in 2000 by the long-term care operators who realized that there was nothing on the market that can manage workforce and labor to the extent that they needed. So they founded Smartlinx, and since then we've been innovating every day and now trying to solve the biggest problem in the market, which is staffing.
Hello, Matt McGinty. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of a company called Intely. So the best way to think of Intely is the Uber of nursing. So there's really a lot of science and data science and technology behind what we do to solve staffing and scheduling problems. But we're nationwide. We're in about 32 states at this point, and really trying to help operators like yourself solve those staffing and scheduling problems.
Good morning. My name is Todd Owens. I'm the new kid on the block here. Startup founded in 2020 out of Seattle, Washington, focused on technology just for this industry. We are working with some relatively large operators in the industry to build workforce management of a modern type, focused specifically on scheduling, in particular to fill shifts while controlling costs. And we're doing that by putting data in the hands of schedulers, by creating a bit more competition and accountability for those staffing agencies, and delivering flexibility for the future workforce, which we think is super important to keeping them engaged and retained.
All right, let's get going. So prior to the pandemic, workforce challenges existed in long-term care. What were those challenges, and how has the pandemic shaped their evolution and our response to them?
He's looking at me. He wants me to answer that one. So everyone knows who's in long-term care here. We had a problem before the pandemic. We needed to recruit swiftly, but yet anyone who had been in the industry a long time still wanted to recruit well. So the people that didn't want to recruit well kind of grabbed them before we had a chance to really interview and do everything we needed. The pandemic kind of taught us that we have to schedule people and hold them accountable to giving good care. Hence why I believe a lot of us in the room are using much more agency than we used to. I think post-pandemic, where we're going, which is really what we're looking to talk about today, I think we need to find that happy medium. I think we need to learn that it's a new world. We need to do a lot more direct hire, a lot more mentoring, a lot more bring them in, teach them expectation, and let them be respected in the buildings, let them be built up into the type of employee you want them to be. And I think we need to then also find a happy medium of stopping to think agency is 100% a bad word, but learning how the agencies can work with us in a more costly fashion for anybody out there that's an agency person, but where they can work with us with stable people that we know that if we need a shift filled, we can bring in, or they can work with us for a period of time, but they should not be like today where we're just panicked to grab anybody we want. I think that's where we're going.
And I would just add to that looking from a workforce management solution that we provide, looking at the staffing levels, it's absolutely clear the shift in the marketplace going from full-time employees to reliance on the agency staff, and that price is skyrocketing, as we all know. So to Melissa's point, I think one of the most important takeaways that I have from this period is really the industry transformation to a better balance between the full-time employees and the agencies, but also the investment within the organization into full-time staff. So hiring the right profile people right from the beginning that fit the culture of the organization, that can continue to grow with the organization, offering additional perks to those employees so that they are not looking to leave. And how do you do that? In today's world, you really have to offer more flexibility to your staff. That's one of the requirements in the new day. It's not the future, it's here today. The staff is looking for flexibility as if they're working for the agency, even when they're working full-time. And to help you do that, there's technology out there, like technology that we offer and others, that can definitely help with flexibility and being able to work when it's more convenient for the nurses. And what's happening with that now, because of the flexibility, they're looking to move into the world of agency that obviously pays higher, but also provides that flexibility. So how do we replicate that within the facilities and create that right balance between the two so everybody can sustain the workforce?
I'm the bad guy. I represent agency. No, not really. We see ourselves much differently than that. I mean, how many of you read the book, The Tipping Point? I think, COVID was the tipping point for many of us. I don't think any of us would argue that. It's really data underneath the hood that matters, and that's what we focus on, right? That's why we see ourselves much larger than just providing people, right? So we can tell you that 92% of our staff currently, and there's over 300,000 in our network across the United States, they want to go work in home health. I don't feel like a lot of operators understand the movement of the workforce, right? And it's really important to understand the movement of the workforce. We know that almost 75 to 80% of them don't want to work full-time, or that work full-time at a facility do not want to work overtime in that facility. They want the freedom to have to be able to go somewhere else so they don't feel the pressure of getting burnt out. They want to just be able to walk in, do their job, walk out. So I think what's really changed, to answer the question from our perspective, is focusing on the data. Focus on the movement of the workforce and where they're going. For better or worse, we believe, and obviously I represent the bad guy from this perspective, we believe that gig is here to stay. It's not going to change. So to the point both the panelists made, you've got to embrace that. And if you don't embrace that, you don't understand the movement of staff and stop trying to solve the problem of a nursing shortage. That's been going on for 80 years. Solve the problem of where are they going and why are they going other places, including to get different gig roles. So understanding the movement of the staff, which I think everybody up here represents to a certain degree, is going to be the most important thing for an operator to understand to make sure that you have high quality of care and everybody benefits along the way.
Yeah, I think the trend has been going on now for 5+ years. This is the gig economy trend. It's the trend towards the flexible workforce. I think COVID accelerated that as people prioritize work-life balance, and I don't think it's going to go back. So I don't actually think you're the bad guy. You're listening to the market, to the workforce. The workforce wants flexibility, and yeah, they probably do need a little more pay. And so, the systems and the processes and the technology really kind of needs to be rethought, retooled in many respects to deliver that. And so, both of us sit from that perspective as relatively new technology companies that are have the opportunity to work and try to solve these challenging problems in new ways.
I want to bring something up really quick that Matt said, that I think a lot of the operators in the room or the administrators in the room, we need to learn to work together more. So who's thinking of the idea of you've got a sniff up the street and they have a full-time person that maybe wants to pick up overtime in your building and vice versa? We need to work together. And people who have, buildings in the same market, in the same region, why can't you do that with your staff? Why can't you say there's available shifts for nights or weekends somewhere else where you don't know the patients as well? You can get a little bit of a break. It's not that same family member making you nuts that always makes you nuts. So it's just a thought.
And on that point, I think another thing that's really important is to see how the technology companies come together as well. Because the ecosystem that we are creating around it, if we don't come together to support it, it will be much harder transformation. So we really need to understand how we can centralize all of the operations with the agencies, with the full-time staff, with the schedulers. How does it all come together, and how does it simplify the operation for the operators and the administrators to do it on a daily basis, where at a glance they can see the data and they can see what's coming through the agency, what comes through internal staff, and really managing and balancing the cost better. So the technologists have to come together, and the industry has to embrace the technology to be able to really leverage the capabilities.
So I'm hearing a couple words thrown around a lot: technology and data. I think there's no question that long-term care is lagging in tech adoption. What are some of the challenges faced by operators in adopting tech?
So, as somebody that sells some of that tech that is not real popular right now, in pre-hire assessments, it's really hard right now to get people to think about being picky up front when the staffing needs are so critical right now. And we understand that. And one of the challenges with these types of technology is that the ROI is based on you having a large pool of people from which you can pick and choose just the best, the ones who can add the most value to your workforce. Now, obviously, that equation is imbalanced right now, but the piece that we've seen many operators struggling with is not being able to think past the immediate right now and realize that even post-hire, there's a lot of value to be had in developing and understanding your workforce. So in other words, good use of technology-based assessments isn't just for screening talent out. It's also for helping you understand what you can do with the talent that you already have. When you do this well, you can also see how you can fit people to whatever culture you're trying to build, and how you might even assign people, and to the point that was just made, even share talent perhaps across different types of facilities. So one of the challenges we're seeing is just an inability right now to see how the technology can be used for more than one purpose. And I think that's incumbent on vendors like us to help explain it, but it's also incumbent on operators to be learning and seeing what are the opportunities, what are the ways that I can use what's available to help our organization move forward.
I can add to that from a technology standpoint. Being able to position and sell technology that has associated cost with it is something that's usually hard to absorb, because long-term care is thin margin industry in general, and it's very difficult to really understand up front how is that technology going to help me really do anything. So I think that there are two major components when you look at that. One is the cost of technology that you're going to offset by the ROI, by using the technology and really automating a lot of steps and being able to look at the data and be more in a predictive and proactive mode as opposed to reactive mode. But the second very important part that I want to raise that we as technologists deal with is organizations don't want to embrace the operational excellence, which is really not technology. It's really streamlining the operations to the point that technology can support. So many times I sit down with the CEOs, COOs, the operators of the facilities that say, I have 30, 50 40 facilities, 3 facilities, doesn't matter. And when I ask, how do you centralize your operations, they say, I don't. This facility does it this way, that facility does it that way, they use this system, and that facility uses a different system. It's very difficult to consolidate that data under a single umbrella and then be able to report and understand where the waste is. So how do you actually bring it to a centralized operating model before you deploy a system so that the system can actually support and give you results? Because just replacing manual with the system will give you an incremental result. But first establishing a proper operation before you ever put the system in and then supporting with the system will give you a much larger ROI. And that, I think, is where we currently see a gap and when we go and sell into the organizations.
I want to mention something. I've done a lot of restructuring and a lot of, taking buildings that needed a little love and getting them organized again. And I think one of the things I always started with was staffing, right? Is the staffing good? Is it in the right place? Or is the PPD okay? But I think the part that I learned over the years was not only the bodies, not only the assessment on how good they are, but the scheduling tool. If your staff is using paper, if your staff is not using what they're supposed to be using, if they don't know how to use it, that's your biggest challenge because you don't know what you have. I promise you, those staffing people don't know what they have if they're not using a real system. And that's become my first step when I go somewhere or someone asks me counsel. It's how are you scheduling? Do your people know how to schedule? Maybe you think you don't. Maybe you think you need as much agency as you're using. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have people that are being underused within the same building. Are they part-time? Are they maxing out those part-time hours? Do you have per diems that you never call? And if you're really scheduling ahead of the curve, like we're all supposed to do for our unions, then you're able to pre-book agency. Now you've got calm. Now you've got a building that runs succinctly. And I know a lot of us are just spinning in a wheel right now and just trying to fill shifts. But at some point as leaders, we have to sit down and say, we have to control this ship, and this is how I'm going to get it started. I just think that's really my advice overall.
Yeah. To add to that, at a simple level, good is the enemy of great. At least that's what we see. We hear it all the time. Oh, this facility runs fine. Pen and paper, we don't need to disrupt that. That's how we've always done things. We've all heard this before. There's another industry that thought that way, and that was the newspaper industry. And they sat there for 20 years to watch their entire industry get washed away because good is the enemy of great. They sat there and watched it. So to your point about understanding your staff and your schedule and how it moves, what if I told you if you book 3 weeks out that you have a 95% chance of filling that, whether that's an agency or whether that's your own per diem pool or that's your own internal pool? Then what if I told you if you did it within 48 hours, you have less than a 30% chance of filling it? Again, that's back to the data, understanding the data and pressuring people like me to work with you and partner with you, to the last point, on understanding the movement of staff and embracing that is really important. So I think good is the enemy of great is what the barrier is, but the way to embrace it is to pressure people like me to be able to say, well, help me understand how this moves and optimize it. Let's all work together, rather than a scheduling platform costs too much, or the agency costs too much and it's a cost center for me, instead of bringing all these things together and figuring out how to make it great.
So we've seen exactly the same thing where portfolios are doing different things across the various locations. And so, it's not just about different processes, it's also about technologies that don't connect, because it's those connections, it's marrying the information from your time and attendance system with your scheduling with your EMR in terms of census and acuity. That's where the real insight comes from. And so whether it's integration or whether it's a suite, to figure out how you can get that full story, and then from the regional level and the home office, dial in on those metrics, because I think there's nothing more compelling to the locations to get on board with the program than knowing that those metrics are being measured by the home office.
That is key point that you bring up, Todd, on metrics. So just because you have a system, it doesn't mean that you're actually utilizing to its fullest. So looking at the metrics, there is nothing more important than that. Otherwise, the business runs you instead of you running the business. So there are so many smart metrics. For example, in our system, we have Smart Score, where you can see by facility how they're utilizing the scheduling solution. And that alone should give you an indication which facilities need to be trained more to use the scheduling, for example, to what Melissa was saying earlier. You got to push it down within the organization to really utilize the tools, or just having the tool is not going to help. So before the system, any system is deployed, identifying those key metrics that will tell you the story proactively, what you need to know about the business so you can run it smoothly, and how you're going to define your levels of staffing. But beyond, how do facilities actually embrace the technology, and how much they're using the technology is key. You can run reports to see things like how much in advance they look to schedule, to what Matt was saying earlier. All the data is in the system. You can see, is it a month in advance? Is it 2 weeks in advance? How often they touch that schedule? And the more often they touch it, that means there is lack of planning. So there has to be proper planning in advance. And of course, the last minute staffing, that's where the help comes through. And they can help with that. So it's really understanding the data, balancing the data, but pushing within the organization from the top down the use of the system. That's one of the successes we've seen with the deployment, but it's also one of the failures. If the executive team within the organization doesn't push it down and doesn't mandate the use of the systems, it doesn't work out.
You know, I had a very smart gentleman say to me a week or two ago, why do you guys hire people and pay them so little to do scheduling? They should be the most important person in your building. He was right. You know, I think I'm even guilty of that. So we really need to look at, in my opinion, I need to look at who are our schedulers. Are we training them, but they're not really getting it? Are they getting parts of it, but not the whole thing? It's a concept, being able to move bodies and overtime and shifts and maximizing hours. Maybe we need to, as an industry, even just look at that piece besides the technology. Who's using the technology?
And maybe it's a different compensation model. Maybe you bonus them based on how much they save you, or you structure it very differently, where you really look at how you're compensating them on running your business.
That smart person told me that too.
I did not talk to them. I don't know.
Okay, so if I can kind of move us from kind of how we got here in the technology to the labor shortage itself, where will new labor come from? Labor being scheduling, CNAs, RNs. Where's it going to come from?
Well, one place that we know it has to come from is not just the standard pools that we've been pulling from all along. We've got to figure out where is that talent hiding. And if you'd seen the recent numbers that were released earlier this week about the number of new entrants back into the workforce, there's cause for some happiness that there's more people that are deciding, you know what, maybe it's time for me to get back to work. So that might be part of it. But this industry is not unique. There's a lot of other industries that are struggling with a similar problem right now of where are we going to find enough talent. And what they've realized is it has to come from both our existing workforce and from an emerging set of opportunities. So this is one place, again, where I think that this arena has a lot of opportunity. There are a number of folks that might be interested, for example, in transitioning into this type of work, but they may not know anything about what this would require, not just in terms of schedule, but in terms of physical demands, psychological, mental demands, cognitive demands. What types of skills do they need? What types of competencies do they need? So this is one of those places, again, where you can leverage well-designed assessments to allow candidates even to pre-qualify or credential themselves so that they know whether they would even be a good candidate for this kind of work. And that's something that could feed agency pipelines as well as your own pipelines. This is one way we can build that talent.
I want to talk a little bit.
Go ahead, sorry.
I want to talk a little bit about turnover, because this pulls into turnover. Where are the employees coming from? Who's running programs in their buildings to mentor staff to go to become a CNA, to become an LPN, LPNs to become RNs? We can't find them. Why don't we grow them? You know, we think about that a lot, I think, with MDS, right? We pull a nurse, we train her because we need a nurse and we already have a nurse. But why don't we think about housekeepers for CNAs or kitchen workers for CNAs? You know, partnering with schools, we all know that. We've all heard that. It's not so easy. But if you can really get it going and get it going organically within your building, well, then you become a good place to work. And those agency people want to come and be stable and do a good job. And the staff wants to come work there and stay there and have an opportunity to grow. These are things 25 years ago when I got into the field, people were doing. And then we got away from it because of cost and because, you know, there wasn't such a shortage a period of time. There was a shortage when I was young. And I was in school, they were marketing in the schools to go become nurses, go become CNAs. I think we're going to go back to that. You know, the high schools are going to see that kind of stuff again. But I also think that we forgot how to treat our employees. And I think we need to get back to treating the employees where they want to be by us. And that just doesn't mean like we're nice and we walk down the hall and smile. It means we have good benefit programs, we have good bonus programs, we have good opportunities for growth. Just my thought.
What if I told everybody here that we have a pool of tens of thousands of workers ready to work for you right now? Everybody be excited, right? You do. They've left the workforce in the past 18 months. They're all ready to work. So we got to start there. And maybe it's the old customer success person in me from back in the day of that, kind of start with the bird in hand. This entire industry has a bird in hand. So what if I told you that a nurse who works in long-term care or even an aide tends to be almost twice as happy with their job than a bedside nurse, right? So that's data. That's data that we have on the industry, and that's important to understand. So there's a there in terms of there's tens of thousands of people ready to work who have left the bedside because they're burnt out, right? They do love long-term care more than they would love working in a hospital, but there's those big rates out there that are attractive, but they don't even want those anymore. And when facilities put out a sign, what if I also told you if you put a sign out about a bonus, that's almost like serving cold pizza? Because they know next year the bonus is gone and they go back to their previous rate. That's actually disenfranchising people. It's having the opposite effect, and I know there's some boost that some people are seeing, but on the backside, what we see on the gig side is they're ready to pull the plug right away and go to gig because they have that flexibility. We have a 90% NPS score, Net Promoter Score with our nurses, or a 90 score, which if you know that metric, 40 is an amazing number. We have 90. So that goes back to embracing the new way of working and listening, right? It's not about the pizza lunches and those types of things. There's tens of thousands of people ready to work, and everybody in this room can be a part of the solution to get those people back, rather than trying to fill the funnel, which will take a long time. Anybody who knows sales or hiring or anything where there's a funnel involved, it takes a while to fill and convert the funnel. What if you already have a bird in hand? That's where everybody in this industry has to focus.
Another important point in the industry I'm observing is I think HR is underrated in this industry, and there is just not enough of HR, not just from an organizational structure point of view, but in terms of retention activities and things that normally happen from the moment you search for talent to the moment that you actually onboard them, and then how to retain them. I can tell you in the last 7 years, at least, when I started in this industry, I remember meeting a lot of leaders that said they had no HR function in the organization, and those were larger organizations. Now I'm hearing more of the new terminology, the chief of people or chief of HR, or they're very different titles representing really more benefits of people. And I think that's another thing that really have to grow with this industry, because a lot of other industries have progressed that to the point where employees are the biggest asset of the organization, and we all know that. However, I feel like in this industry, and data shows that, there is insufficient focus on how to retain the employee, but that starts with onboarding. That starts with who you're looking for and finding the right talent that you can cultivate and retain after by offering additional benefits, et cetera, and some educational programs that Melissa was talking about.
Yeah, I think I'd only add, you have to start with retention if you're going to think about growth. And that really means take care of the nurse. And the most important thing you can do for them is to keep the shift full. It's amazing how many operators that I've run into typically at the home office where they don't really even want to talk about the notion of agency. But on the ground floor, what you find is the opposite, where it's burnout. They're trying, people are working overtime. It's not just a physical burnout, it's also a moral burnout. They're not able to deliver that care that they signed up for. So, I think it is a Band-Aid to bring in supplemental staff. And, I think there are a lot of great things that are on the way. There's vendors and technology platforms that want to work with you to bring that process under control, but fill the shift, I guess, is what I'd like to see.
So on the topic of retention and engagement of the workforce, What non-monetary incentives can we use to retain our workforce and increase the impact they have on the people that they care for?
Flexible pay being one of them, and probably one of the most important ones. People don't want to wait 2 weeks nowadays to get paid. They're looking to get paid when they completed their shift, and that's one of the reasons they want to work for an agency, because when they're done with the day, they get paid. So there are plenty of technologies today that offer flexible pay, and there are some. For example, we just rolled out a partnership with a company called Rain that offers that kind of benefit. However, there is no burden on the employer. There is no reconciliation that needs to happen. There is really no touch of the system that needs to happen. It's directly between the employee and the third-party provider. Things like that will help with retention. It's the internal perks that are non-financial necessarily that can help retain staff, that gives them similar capabilities as the agency work, flexibility with the scheduling, and then on-demand pay as the agency would. However, you still belong to an organization.
Yeah, that's totally right. And where that comes from, to raise it up a level, is listening. I know it sounds really simple, but we survey hundreds of thousands of nurses every week, so that if you know that same-day pay becomes an issue, you can address it right away. If you know something else is an issue, you can address it right away. Constantly staying on the beat of, quote-unquote, your supply that's fulfilling, kind of the hours, is the most important thing that we found. And sometimes it's not big things, right? Same-day pay, you're right, there's a lot of people that offer that. It's relatively easy, not trivial, but relatively easy to do that. But it starts with listening, and I can tell you that the entire nurse force in the country feels like they're not being listened to right now. So one of the best things you can do is survey them and listen, even if you don't like the answer. Because therein lies how you solve the problem. So when the next pay, same-day pay, or whatever the next thing is, constantly listen, even though you don't like the answer sometimes. In there, you'll start to find the nuggets of information that's going to help the business evolve as the world around you evolves, rather than reactionary, and then you're stuck in that cycle that we talked about. You're just in that cycle forever, and you feel like you can't break out.
We used to talk about happy employees don't leave. And then a lot of our employees got tired, and the pandemic just disheartened a lot of people. I think that our struggle is to make our employees happy again. In that saying happy people don't leave was all about, you can't pull people away if more money if they're happy, right? So it should all be about non-financial. So as I was having employees leave through the pandemic, people that had not been there very long, some of the interviews that I did or that I read that some of the staff did was really about not being listened to, not being supported. So I tried something that's rolling out that I had done in the past, a long time ago, called a mentor program. Now, not buddy up, not, we're training people that already know their job for weeks, but a real buddy where you don't sit through some crazy long orientation, because nobody wants to do that. But the people that do sit through orientation, their biggest complaint was once they got on the floor, there was nobody there for them. I had no one to talk to. The DNS was never there. There was no unit manager. People were out, and there was no one to ask just where to find basic things. So the concept is, take some of your best staff, your loudest staff, your union rep staff, the people that really know the building in and out and can make or break you, and incentivize them to be mentors to people. Give them a few dollars and say, hey, take some people under your wing. This is the new class this week. Check in on them every day. Check in on them all the way through until they're here quite a few months, and we have success with them. Show them where the lunchroom is. If they're sitting by themselves, sit with them. Things like that. We're all human. It's that same feeling for everyone. How does that guy have, a bottle of water? Where did he get that from? Are there a soda machine somewhere? Things like that we miss, that human aspect. I think it's really important to bring that back. And again, I think our people will stay if they're happy. And happy is comfort to people.
So happy is comfort, and what you're describing is also an intervention that addresses one of the most demotivating forces that affects any worker, which is when there's a mismatch between the demands we put on them and the resources that they feel they have to address those. when we don't hire people who fit, or we don't train people to fit appropriately their work, then those discrepancies become even more pronounced. So what you're describing is a really good example of using like a social support network to create access to information. That's a resource. The thing is, if the gap is too broad to begin with, if we have so many people who don't fit that role, then we're going to see more and more of those demotivating discrepancies arise. And this is why it's super important that we do a better job of identifying and developing talent throughout their time with us. The other comment I'll just make about motivation is that it goes beyond the happiness thing too. And it goes beyond just responding to the outcome metrics that we're so much hearing about right now, is that if we're only focusing on metrics, most of these metrics are outcomes, so we're being reactive. But a lot of times, if we actually seriously listen to what these employees are needing, we're going to start to hear some of those more sort of antecedent or forward-leaning kind of leading indicators, what we would refer to them as. And that may allow us to show these individuals that we actually do hear the challenges they're facing, and we're not just concerned about that later metric, but we're actually trying to help them do a better job with whatever their day-to-day task might be. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth along this line.
You know, one thing I would ask myself if I was sitting in your chair is, are we employee-centric? And should we be employee-centric? I don't think that's a decision to take lightly. There's certainly an underlying mission to take care of the residents and patients. But at the end of the day, the only way you're going to be able to deliver that is through the team. And I would say that's cultural. Long ago, I was a naval officer, and I remember a saying, that we would agonize about, which is the beatings will continue until morale improves. The military, I don't think, is employee-centric. That's not what they stand for. And so, just the cultural aspect of making a change, and maybe now's the time.
To add to that point, and I guess along with what everyone else is saying, what we hear from the nurses is they don't a lot of times have a sense of belonging to the organization. They feel while they work full-time, they're independent. Why? Because in a lot of other industries, there are corporate emails, there's a corporate communication channels that they're lacking within the organization. So they're lacking that central culture of the organization, or a sense of belonging that they really would like to have, because it gives them more comfort that Melissa was talking about, and more happiness because they are a part of something bigger. And again, technologies now enable all of that. Any mobile application enable messaging, communication, and the organizations really have to take it very seriously to be able to be proactive in communication with their employees and making sure that they constantly take their heartbeat and they really understand and keep their hand on the pulse. What's going on with the full-time staff? What's the culture of that staff? Because that's really the heart of the problem. But you got to find a way to communicate with all of them and keep that front and center. The other really quick point that I want to bring up is this industry to some extent is lagging behind in some of these ideas. However, a lot of other industries have gone through this kinds of transformation, and I think it's time that long-term care look elsewhere to see what's been done to help and be open-minded about it. Many times we just hear an answer, that's not what we do. We understand that, and we want you to know that when we're going to meetings with you, we understand that, but we hope that we can bring some help and advice and expertise from some other areas that can help you evolve your businesses and industries as a whole.
All right, so I do want to move on and talk about agencies, but just one thing, just to kind of finish off this topic. We did a prep call a couple weeks ago, and Todd said a couple things on there that I just wanted to share with you all. This is about how can operators deliver the best care to nurses, and how can operators embrace the needs of the nurse versus expecting that the nurse is going to embrace the needs of the operator. So, food for thought. On the topic of agencies, kind of a broad question. One, how to make the best use of agencies, and I'll ask that in just kind of under the guise of kind of how can you address immediate staffing needs while also building a foundation for future success? And this kind of goes back to the resilience point. How do you address immediate needs now while also building a solid foundation?
So I think it's really important that we work with our agency employees and make them feel like they're part of the organization. And I don't mean us. I mean teaching our staff to do that. A lot of us have heard that, our full-timers run the agency out, or they complain about them, or they complain to families about them. Nobody wants to be that agency person then, right? So I think that it's really important that we start to teach, hey, in order to recover, we have to get stable. And in order to get stable, we're going to use agency. And we're going to use the best of the best agency. So tell us who you like. Who should we schedule? Who do you want to work with? Make partners with that agency owner, liaison, whoever it is that you're working with. I like this person. I don't like this person. The staff really works well with this person. Can I get them in here more? Maybe that's the solution of how we all get to a point where that agency isn't a bad word. I never embraced that as agency being a bad word, because I always had the expectation that I still did orientation with those people. I didn't just throw them on the floor. They learned something about culture, and they wanted to keep coming back to the building then. But you really have to work at that, and you have to get your staff to work at that and really buy into that, because they feel like they're taking their overtime shifts. Right now, a lot of them don't want the overtime shifts. They're tired. So we really need to say, hey, help me make these employees, these agency employees, just like us. Let's get them to the point where we don't complain about them.
Yeah, being on that side. So February 15th is my birthday. Anybody wants to send me a gift, I'll give you my address afterwards. But it's also a fun point in the data for our company, right? So all of you get a big bill, some from agency, somewhere around the end of January. And then, by the time it goes through finance and checks get cut, it's about February 15th. It's my birthday. And what do you think happens at that point? Stop using agency. Okay, what do you think happens for 2 weeks? It goes down. What do you think happens the first week of March? It's Christmas. It shoots back up again, right? So that is just, again, the data pointing to a very short-sighted way of looking at things is actually increasing your costs. Because what you do is lean on your folks, mandatory overtime. I just got done telling you that I know that 90% of them don't want to work overtime in the facility they're in, or even the corporation that they're a part of, to the point about working together. So what do? They stop working overtime. That forces you to then have to compensate with the exact thing that you're trying to reduce the cost with. It happens like clockwork every single year. I can show you charts until it puts you to sleep up here. So again, it goes to embracing that the gig way of working is not going anywhere, right? It is not leaving. And it's about, frankly, putting pressure on people like me to understand what I just shared with you. As an operator, what does your ebb and flow of staffing look like throughout the year? And I could show you how that aligns to your choices, right? And using folks that can provide data that you can be a business partner with to help you understand how to optimize that, rather than just being, the thing you don't want to talk about. Right? It has to be the thing that it's like, how do we work together on this problem? Because we think you're never going to see less than 5 to 10% of your staffing be through a gig source of some kind. So why not partner with somebody who, A, is going to happily share that data with you to help you optimize it, right? And then you have a strategic partnership with somebody, to the earlier point, that wants to help you operate better, and everybody meets their goals. Because we want to keep a 90% NPS score with our nurses. We want them referring us to everybody. We do that by being able to inform them about how things are going to ebb and flow. So having that partnership is going to be really, really key, and really focusing, again, on those metrics and folks that you can partner with that give you those, whether they're a scheduling provider or whatever their source is, to help you understand that and really plan for it rather than react.
And us being right in the middle, not just physically here on the floor, but really being in between the operator and the agency staffing, making that process easy.
Yeah.
Today, this process is extremely cumbersome. It's very manual. It's very labor intensive. You call the agency, so you get on their application to try to put the open shifts, etc. That ability should be centralized, as we did with the staffing marketplace, where it allows you to consolidate all of your requests and post it right within the application, and really take in the responses right within the application. So simplifying that process is really key, because one of the biggest things we hear from the operators and the agency is the invoice reconciliation. Where are they clocking? Are they clocking with their clock, with my clock? Are they clocking on my phone? How do I reconcile those hours? How do I ensure that they clock in? And the process of getting those agency people in the door. How do you send them the QR code? How can they scan in and you don't waste 10, 15 minutes, 20, 30 minutes onboarding them as they show up at your door, where you got to give them a badge and you got to train them and you got to give them additional information, which you can still do, but you can send that all in advance if you do it all through an automated way. So I think it's really important, which is where we started, how we all come together to really solve this problem with an understanding that it's a large ecosystem, but working with the operators to really embrace it.
Yeah, so I just add here, we've only been in business for 2 years, but we've spoken with hundreds of operators trying to understand kind of where you are today and where you want to go. And almost across the board, of course, everybody has a full-time staff and some people that work part-time. And almost across the board, everybody has between 1 and 10 agencies that they work with. But some of the forward-leaning operators now are asking about technology that can help them create their own internal float, especially if you've got the density in a particular geo or if you have potential partnerships. There's no reason why we can't set up an internal float across partnerships. You're always going to have a supplemental agency. It's going to be increasingly the gig worker. So I think you've got to optimize the mix of these 3 layers of your workforce. They are your employees. Every single one of them matters. Know them by name. Treat them accordingly, right? And use technology to help to strike that balance.
So I just want to say something really quickly because Todd just brought up what I had brought up earlier about working within your market to share employees, working within your market, even with other owners and operators. There's a lot of operators here this week that are really upset about the agency rates, right? Those rates will burst. They'll burst faster if we start to solve some of the problem. Sorry, but it's true. We're always going to need agency.
We hope it does.
Yeah, we always will need agency. I've said this for years. We will always need agency because you have things that happen. And I think I can tell you the facilities that I had that had a little bit larger of a complement of agency actually survived the pandemic better because when people were getting sick, in the buildings that had no agency, I had no one to replace them with. I didn't have a partner. I didn't have someone to call and say, hey, I've been doing business with you for so long. Please help me out. I learned a lesson that I really needed to have a few partners to call and say, hey, I've been helping you, now help me. There's a lot of people in here that have a lot of homes that could leverage that kind of conversation, and I'm sure we did. I think that if we're all complaining about the rates are naturally going to burst. Everybody who's in the industry knows that. But I think that we can help that along if we work together instead of against each other, or if we even start to think out of the box with our own organizations.
Yeah, and to add one other quick point, we totally agreed. In Telecare, we want to solve bigger problems than just staffing problems. So we hope that that this gets sorted out, and we agree rates will burst. And a lot of that's largely been driven by, kind of travel has created this trickle-down impact on everybody. Just the one thing to keep in mind is by solving an acute problem, if you just want to solve rates, right? Again, at the end of the day, it's a marketplace. And what the nurses learned through the pandemic is if they have a voice or they can go to a place that have a voice, they will go there. So, I told you 92% of our nurses want to go work in home health. So think about that. Don't create an environment where you drive your supplies somewhere else because the market will correct on its own if you just try to drive down rates rather than think of, to the point we talked about earlier, how do you make the nurse happier, whether they're your full-time staff, whether they're part of a float pool, whether it's a float pool that's a group of facilities that get together, or if it's using, per diem usage like we have. So just keep in mind, if you just want to drive down rates, you just get on the phone and say, I need your rate lower. Well, the nurse is just not going to pick up that. And then they're going to go to home health or, as a hospital down the street. I told you they like to work in long-term care, but if you get an ICU rate at, whatever, they're going to think, well, maybe I should go do that. So just staying on top of that and not just being really acute and reactionary to that and thinking broader is going to be really, really important for everybody to get, kind of through the correction that just has to happen.
All right. So looking ahead, what regulatory changes do you see coming down the pike that's kind of those that are focused on operators and those that are focused on specifically the direct care workforce?
I guess we're going to find out, right? A lot of us haven't had survey for a really long time, and we're kind of holding our breath. I think that we've been in a pandemic where the employees that stayed, whether they were our employee or an agency employee, whoever they were that were there, really wanted to be there because we know people had the ability to walk away. We saw a lot of people walk away. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the people walked away because they didn't want to be there. Obviously, there's circumstances. But the people that stayed definitely wanted to be there and take care of people in long-term care. I'm hoping that that's going to show during our regulation or during our survey process. I'm hoping that the conversations that we can have with the surveyors and the things that still were maintained while certain things fell a little bit, I'm hoping that they'll understand that. I know that I've had several very good surveys since the pandemic has slowed down. So we'll see.
Yeah, and there's two things we're seeing, and I sit on a weekly call where I hear about some of this stuff. So, yeah, I think one thing is, operators being held to a retention standard is something that we're personally going to put a lot of effort into as a company to try to help operators understand, because agency becomes part of that to the point we've all been making up here. That's now part of that math equation, and we want to be able to help everybody in this room be able to solve that math equation. So I think everybody's got to be thinking about that. That's really important, because then you get in the hamster wheel, right? Well, then you reduce star rating, up your staffing, then your costs go back up. The whole thing is a hamster wheel.
Yeah, the new metrics are going to include agency. For anyone who doesn't know that,
yes.
the retention,
yeah.
It is going to include agency.
It's big, right? So adopting what everybody here has been talking about is going to be really, really important. Another thing we're seeing a lot of is rate caps come up. A lot of talk about rate caps. A lot of operators, beating on legislature to get rate caps. And by the way, speaking selfishly as IntelliCare, and I've tried not to talk about IntelliCare at all, we feel like we have the best data science underneath it. So we actually work great in a rate cap market like Massachusetts because we use data science to adjust the rates ourselves without having a human do it within the rate cap. And we tend to be very successful. We have like a 60% market share in Massachusetts. So great, bring them on. But also I'll tell you that's a really bad idea because again, they're just going to leave. If you cap where they're going to work, they're going to leave. They're going to go somewhere where they can make more. Right, so it's yes, I see as an operator where you're like, I'm operating at a 1 or 2 point margin or whatever it is, I've got to optimize the business. Totally get it. I totally get it if I was in those shoes. And there's a lot of people that can help, including us with that. But if you focus on that, again, that really acute problem, you're going to drive your workforce away. So that's one of the legislative things we see a lot of, and it needs a lot more thinking. Because we saw what happened in Massachusetts, right? What happened in Massachusetts, then you have to have the National Guard come in and you have emergency workforces. And guess what that did? It drove the market price up because they're paying $100, $150 to a nurse to come from California. So what happened when things started to resettle? It was a mess, right? So that's what it creates. So I think as operators, I would really think about, right, ask really next level questions about rate caps. And I know the knee-jerk reaction is like, that's a great idea. And again, I would embrace it. But that's a knee-jerk reaction. Think about the impact it has on the workforce on the other side, and don't drive them to go somewhere else. That's just like the newspaper industry. Imagine if you had all that data 20 years ago to say, hey guys, guess what? Your whole industry would be gone 20 years later, and here's why. Like, these are some of the things happening in front of us that you can't take really acute answers to. We have to really look at the bigger picture and make sure you're thinking about a marketplace and, again, taking care of your most valuable resource.
I want to say something else really quick about the regulatory and the new measures with retention, because I've had a lot of calls personally about how to handle, what are we going to do, how is that going to be handled. I really think it goes back to what I started with almost an hour ago, scheduling in advance. Use your agency and pre-book them. Book them for months at a time, not every day somebody different coming in. That's how you're going to get your attention, even with agency, if you're forced to use it. And that's my best answer at the moment on that until I come up with a better one.
I would agree with that, but it goes along with the rate as well, right? Doing that where the rate, whether it's capped or not, it has to work for the organizations before those organizations collapse, because it's like a real estate bubble. It's the same thing, right? It gets to a point when it's no longer sustainable, it bursts. So before the organizations fold, there's got to be something done about what's the maximum. Like at some point in time, you got to be able to absorb the cost and still sustain the facilities. And something has to be done about that, because right now it's just a wild, wild west.
All right, so we've got a few minutes left. I'd love to open it up to Q&A. I don't know what happened to my AV guys, but if whoever wants to ask a question, I will personally walk my mic over and give you the mic. It's right there. Right here. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. One of the things that really strikes me, if you believe the AARP study from 2020, which reported that 20% of the adult population are unpaid caregivers, so that's us in the room, 20% of us are caring for an adult, a parent, a grandparent, a spouse. 20% of your workforce are going home and caring for a parent, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just wondering, I guess, Melissa, for you as the provider, are there any ways you can think about retaining your staff by supporting them as they're also caregivers when they go back home?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of conversations about that. Thanks, Stephen. I think we need to stop being so rigid with schedules. We're very bought into that everybody has to work, 7 to 3, Monday through Friday, every other weekend. It has to be this way, it has to be this way. I think that as a mom, I was given the opportunity to always work for people that were really allowed me to not have that rigidity. Why don't we do that for our staff? Why can't we say, if you have an appointment for a parent or you have an appointment for a child, when you make that appointment, it's probably not for tomorrow. Let us know. We'll bring someone in 2 hours earlier, try to work with it. Don't do it in the middle of the shift if you can't. I think there's a lot of those types of ideas. I also think that I've heard recently some ideas of employers talking again, which is again something we did years ago, about childcare in facilities or local to facilities. I've also heard about partnering with like adult days or in the community that the facility would partner for sick parents that could go be somewhere. I think we need to evolve that way. I agree with you, Stephen.
Which goes back to flexibility.
Flexibility. We need to be more flexible. I say this to staff, we need to get out of our own way.
We hear the same thing, net, too, because we have to schedule within what the facilities want to schedule. So we even hear we need more flexibility. Well, it's hard for us to do that unless the facility will be flexible with scheduling people. So we hear flexibility overwhelmingly all the
You've
time.
got to give that to your staff leaders, though. If you're not an administrator in the building right now, and you're not the director of nursing, you need to teach that and expect that. It's not going to just come from way up in a nice tower. It's got to be culture.
That's wonderful. That's a great question. Yep.
First, great conversation, folks. My question is, what's the role, or what role, if any, and I believe they're substantial, does public policy play here? So, for instance, one of the biggest issues we're trying to deal with in my state is the benefits cliff. I mean, we hear over and over again where that line employee doesn't take the extra shift, has to decline the promotion because they're going to lose some of their public benefits. So benefits cliff is one example. Another is a public-private partnership on an employee benefits captive, so that it's the company or the provider that's providing the health benefits, not the public sector. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
I had a conversation with a gentleman on my way down here in the airport, a long-term care person, who told me that they have eliminated agency in their homes. How did they do it? And I said, nah, how did you do that? Benefit packages, all about benefit packages and taking the cost that they were spending on rotating doors and all kinds of different things and really incentivizing retention through benefits that work for people. Out of the box benefits that maybe we've never done in this industry before, as well as choices of benefits where we always say like it's this or this. Well, maybe there's 3 or 4 now that work for someone.
I guess my question is for anybody who wants to field it. What are your thoughts on mobilizing your injured workforce, your light duty guys, modified duty, and bringing those people in to kind of take a little pressure off of your overtime staff and, in those programs?
I am 100% for that. I did it before the pandemic. I think it's really important to still do it. I think that the staff appreciates someone to just walk down the hall and answer a call bell, or to hand out the Ensure at 2 o'clock.
All right. So time is officially up. I don't know if we want to. Do you want to take one more question? Do you want to go eat lunch? What's the protocol here?
Whatever you say, you're the in charge man.
One more question. You heard it here first. That lady down there.
Hey, so sometimes we see a disconnect in what operators will choose in regards to platforms for their staff. In regards to sometimes the systems are too hard for the low-level staff to use. There are some great platforms out there, and some of them push, different things. I think that there's room for more integrations so that everybody could collaborate with systems that are really easy to use, because many times we roll out systems, we spend a lot of money, and we don't get the benefit out of it because our glorified CNAs that are our schedulers that are managing multi-million-dollar budgets aren't able to use the actual platform sometimes in the way it was created or meant to be used.
So I'm just going to go back to a point I made earlier. I think that those people should be much more skilled and much better paid, and we shouldn't use a glorified CNA. And I think the change starts when we do that.
Yeah.
And to add to that, I think it's very important to ensure that the staff is properly trained on the solutions when the solutions are rolled out, because just because they're there, they're not going to do anything on its own. The staff has to be properly trained on what is expected of them and how to utilize it. And given the turnover within the organizations in this industry, every new person who comes on board needs to be retrained. It can't be just a word of mouth. They really need to understand how to utilize the system to get the best benefit out of it.
I still think there's a disconnect in that the training may not happen to the right folks in the right time, and therefore we keep looking at data that really isn't accurate. It really is retroactive rather than proactive. And therefore it creates some of the issues in where we're relying on really expensive staffing agency and not doing our recruitment processes the way it needs to be.
Right, and it's really, really important to make the selection on the technology as the last step, but the process is key. The operations is number one. How are you going to operate your organization before you select your technology? The technology has to support that process. That is really the key to all of that.
I think one of the most important items is the ease of use. It needs to be extremely
Absolutely.
simple. It doesn't matter if we decide to increase, what we're paying the salaries for schedulers. At the end of the day, we now know that most of the industry has low-level schedulers or
Absolutely.
inexperienced schedulers, I should say, right?
So I'm going to leave you with the fact that I think that we should change that altogether. I'm not talking about salary. I'm talking about qualifications. I'm not saying, keep the same type of person that we have, but give them, $10 an hour more. I'm saying make them a leadership role in your building with that kind of compensation and that kind of expectation that they are a department head level, executive level person. And I don't think you could go to an administrator or an owner with a good ROI report showing all the money you're going to save with agency and overtime by just bringing in someone that maybe costs in a year $40,000 more at a whole different level of person, or $50,000 more.
Yeah, different skill set. Whole different skill set.
A whole different skill set. I'm talking about a professional person that has understanding of systems and IT, and is able to be trained in what our staffing patterns are. There's loads of kids coming out of school that do data Loads of kids that would be able to do it, that
You're-
have good intuitive understanding of how to use metrics.
Your point is well taken, though, that usability is key. And I will tell you this, business-to-business software, like the software that you use today, is getting more and more usable. And the benchmark for almost all software companies now is we want it to be as usable as the software that a CNA uses in their day-to-day life. So it is a journey. We're not there yet, but we're moving in that direction.
Wonderful points. They only paid me for the first hour, so this is all free time. I'm hungry. Let's wrap it. Thank you all. Have a wonderful time at eCap.